Well, now you got into this mess by going down a waterfall. Now, how would you suppose we can get them out of there?
By going up the waterfall?
That's right. Anything's possible in Disneyland.
Now, most carousels go round and round without getting anywhere, but on this one, at every turn, we'll be making progress. And progress is not just moving ahead, it's dreaming and working and building a better way of life. Progress is the sound of a motor, the hum of a turbine, the heartbeat of a factory, the sound of a symphony, the roar of a rocket. Progress is people getting release from drudgery, gaining more time to enjoy themselves and live richer lives. And as long as man dreams and works and builds, this progress will go on in your life and mine. Welcome, friends, and thank you for joining us on this episode of Up the Waterfall with your hosts Zanna and Scott Otis. Here we take a journey up the waterfall of Disney Parks history, facts, and nostalgia with a present-day point of view. And that, of course, was the original Rex Allen narration from the 1964 World's Fair.
I absolutely love that opening.
The presentation of GE's Progress Land.
Ooh.
And in this episode, we will journey back to the Carousel of Progress origins.
That's fun.
Its present state and where we hope it will go in the future.
Interesting.
So, let's jump in.
It's a good thing I researched that topic. That's what it was.
I think this is going to be a mostly Scott episode because he is the facts and figures 27 books on this subject alone person.
It might have been 30, but anything about that goes back to the World's Fair and like old Disneyland, yeah, I like that stuff. So
and I like that you like it, and that's why we're together.
Oh.
But yeah, in preparing for this episode, we came home the other night, and I think there was about, 25 books stacked up in front of you. So
at least a lot of them, the really big coffee table books, that a lot of which are right behind me. But yeah.
So you've done your homework, and now let's hear about it.
I guess there's a little bit up here, but I actually did write some notes, but so I might have to use them.
That's totally okay.
Anyway, Progress Land actually came from an idea quite a long time ago, back in Disneyland's infancy. They were just, it opened in 1955, and about 1958 or so, they were looking to expand. And one of the prime locations that they were thinking about expanding was behind Main Street, kind of in between Main Street and Tomorrowland, and there was going to be an offshoot. And there were many ideas that they were going to have for that, including Liberty Street, which eventually became Liberty Square at the Magic Kingdom, International Street, which kind of became World Showcase at Epcot. But another idea that they had was for a place called Edison Square.
Ah, yes.
Yes. So anyway, Edison Square was it was planned for that area, and they were even thinking about having it open in Easter of 1959. With an opening kind of near the plaza, or the Plaza Inn. Anyway, it was going to be more of an urban setting than the Midwest setting of Main Street, kind of a neighborhood, but in a larger city, maybe Chicago. And it was going to be set circa 1918, and would represent kind of the new movement into electricity and having that power the cities. And that was, it was lighting up the nation. And they were even going to have a statue of Thomas Edison right in the middle.
Wow. But now this was at where Plaza Inn is right now?
Actually behind that.
Behind that? Okay.
In a place that really they've never put an attraction. It's kind of backstage behind Main Street.
Oh, okay.
So
I've never been backstage at Disneyland.
Yeah, they've never really used that. But for some reason, they always thought that they could put a land there. But I mean, I know that area is very desperately needed for all of the services to all of the backstage stuff to get to all of those places. So I can't imagine if they had put a land there that they would have that would have just been way too tight, in my opinion. But anyway, the main attraction at Edison Square would be a show called Harnessing the Lightning. It was going to be a 4-act history of electricity, as seen through the eyes of 4 generations of an American family. But instead of what we know now as the Carousel of Progress, these would actually be a walkthrough exhibit with 4 vignettes, which would be going like decade by decade and would be narrated. So scene 1, they actually had names for all these scenes. The first one was going to be called 1% Inspiration, 99% Perspiration, and it was going to be set in 1898. So this is kind of like the infancy of electricity when Thomas Edison was doing all of his fun inventions. And then the second one was going to be called Initials of a Friend, which kind of is a reference to GE, General Electric. And that was going to be set in 1918, which was the setting of the entire land. So that's really when electricity was really starting in a lot of the major cities, just in its infancy. The third scene was going to be called Living Better Electrically, which was going to be set in 1958, which at that time was present day. And then the fourth scene was going to be called More Power to America, which was going to be set sometime in the future. Not sure when. But it did predict such things as a microwave oven, which at that time had been invented but was very, very new, as well as use of a personal computer.
Wow.
Yeah. So anyway, and they were going to use, to represent the family, these electromechanical animated figures, which, it sounds like audio animatronics, but this is a full 5 years before audio animatronics was even invented. So they had the idea to try to come up with something that would later become audio animatronics.
Yeah.
Anyway, Edison Square was such a big deal, they even had it on the park maps as kind of like a coming soon thing. So it was like, unlike the Liberty Street and the International Street, this one they were set to go. And GE was going to be the sponsor. And it was on the park maps. But later they took them off the park maps because GE said, let's not do that. Let's actually do something for the World's Fair that's coming up. Because in 1964, the World's Fair was coming to New York City. And this was a huge deal. And a lot of people remember the 1939 New York World's Fair. That was kind of like the almost like the World's Fair of World's Fairs. I know there were some really great ones before that. Certainly the Columbia Expedition, or I don't think I said that. Exposition, which was in Chicago in 1893. And actually Walt's father worked on that one as a carpenter. And of course, the 1906 one, I think, in St. Louis. That was a huge deal, too.
Meet me in St. Louis.
And the invention of the Ferris wheel and all that. That one might have been Chicago.
That was Chicago.
I get them all mixed up.
It's okay.
But anyway, the World's Fair coming back to New York City was going to be a huge deal. And GE, they were actually going through a rough time at this time. They had gone through a whole price-fixing scandal, and a lot of the public was basically looking pretty down on GE because they had been caught price-fixing. And so they had a negative image. And so they wanted to improve that image, and so they...
Who better than Walt Disney to do that?
And actually, at the end of the fair, approval ratings for GE had just skyrocketed.
Wow, that's crazy to think about.
Like 25% to 80% of those who thought of them favorably, simply because of their association with Walt Disney at the fair. So anyway, they wanted to do that, so they came up with the idea of Progress Land. So that Edison Square never came to be. And anyway, Progress Land was just a fun thing. John Hench had actually recently seen Our Town on Broadway. And he kind of got, and he had Walt see it as well. And they kind of got the idea to have the father figure of, or I guess the narrator of Our Town kind of be similar to the father figure of this Progress Land show. But anyway, the initial story, the father's name was Wilbur K. Watt, which was a very curious name. Curious name, like Watt. Get it?
Yeah,
Watt?
I get it.
Anyway, that eventually changed to the Cartwrights, and then they were the Peabodys or Peabodys depending on whether you're from Massachusetts or not.
Yeah, you asked me about that because from being from Massachusetts, we would say Peabody as Peabody. But you asked if we would say a last name that way too, and I'm like, I never knew anybody with the last name Peabody.
Well, the family in Progress Land
Peabody. I guess it would be
at one point
Peabody.
was called Peabody. At least that's what I thought it was. Or the Peabodys. From Middleburg, USA. You know, the kind of generic midtown town.
I think it's good that they went with no name, though,
Yeah,
because then everyone can
became
sort of
nameless.
identify.
Anyway, it was to go through 4 scenes. It's the similar structure that you know today. It has 6 rotating scenes. The first is a load area, and then it kind of goes through 4 scenes through the decades of just kind of what kind of advances in electricity they were going to have.
And it was the 1910s?
Well, the original one was kind of 1880s.
Oh, okay.
And then the 1920s, then the 1940s, and then kind of present day.
Future. Oh,
Actually,
present day and the
well,
original?
present day with a futuristic
Yeah.
slant. But yeah, and actually, John Hench had actually the famous Imagineer. He had done designs for the final scene, and there's just some beautiful images. Hopefully, we'll be able to get those up there of what kind of the present day / future would look like. So that's really neat. Anyway, but in 1963, they had made a full demo recording of the entire show using Western star Rex Allen as the
singing
voice
cowboy.
Of the father. That's right, the singing cowboy. He was just got a really folksy, down-home voice. Very familiar, very, very comforting. And he was the father. And they actually used a musical score composed by Buddy Baker. And then they added, of course, the famous song from the Sherman Brothers.
Yes.
Called There's a Great Big Beautiful Tomorrow. I'm sure a lot of you know this one.
Yeah.
So Walt tasked them with writing a song that would tell the story without giving away what's happening, as well as capturing the spirit of the pavilion, of the essence of the pavilion. And I think they succeeded pretty well.
I think they did, and it also really encapsulates Walt Disney's outlook on life, and it really is like that's
it's
Walt.
funny that you say that, because I know Richard Sherman, he's tells this one story about how they were coming up with the idea of the kind of the words for that, and they started by saying Walt has a dream, and that's a start, and they used that as the opening line.
Their stories are so
Man
great.
has a dream, and that's a start. He follows his dream with mind and heart. Right?
Yes, I might follow up on the song later when you get to present day.
But anyway, so a lot of the whole idea of going back in time, though, to previous decades and showcasing the advancement of electricity, but through the past, General Electric originally was not very fond of this idea because they didn't want like their old appliances to be in there. Their whole idea was progress, or that they were selling progress. And so they didn't want all of that old stuff to be showcased. But Walt, he got really angry about that because he was like, for my entire career, I've been using nostalgia as a way to tell the stories. And, I think I've done a pretty good job with that. Trust me, it's going to work this way. And the one GE executive who kind of had the strongest voice on that, they kind of ushered him away and just
the power of
You're no
Walt
longer
Disney.
involved with this. And he eventually got to do that and used the nostalgia through story.
Very cool.
Yeah. But anyway, originally they had earlier versions of the show. They actually included popular songs of the time, including such songs as Bird in a Gilded Cage and an old song called Barney
that old
Google.
favorite. Barney Google with the googly eyes?
Yeah.
Yeah. My parents grew up in the 50s. I know a few things.
I actually did not know that one. But it's funny. They used the word Google way back then.
Ah, yes.
But in a different context.
That's what you were talking about.
It was.
He told me this, and I didn't realize it was from Barney Google.
I didn't tell you the context. But anyway, so Buddy Baker, he actually composed all the different various styles that kind of transitioned each of the different scenes, kind of, from the the old time of the 1880s to the 1920s, 1940s that we're all familiar with, kind of when the show kind of opens, when each scene opens and closes. He actually came up with those transitions using the song that the Sherman Brothers wrote. And originally, the final scene was going to be constantly updated, and with cutting-edge technology. And John Henshey actually tasked himself with kind of like going through all of the popular mechanics kind of magazines and newspapers, and just kind of trying to become familiar with everything that's up and coming to do that. And I think in the fair, it was only there for 2 seasons, but I think they did a good job there. Probably did so at Disneyland, but then at Disney World, well, we know how that happens. So we'll probably talk a little bit more about that. But anyway, they used this newfangled thing called audio animatronics that they had just used with birds in the Enchanted Tiki Room at Disneyland. But this was the thing at the World's Fair was an idea to use the corporate money from the sponsorship of General Electric to essentially fuel their ideas
and develop them.
Yeah, so in addition to the ride systems, they actually came up with human audio animatronics that they used in both the Lincoln exhibit at the fair as well as this. And they actually did also have some at the Ford Skyway.
Oh yeah, those cavemen?
Yeah, which were very rudimentary. But mainly it was going to be used here at the Progress Land, where they actually had, I think, a total of 32 audio animatronics.
Wow.
Including a couple of spring robins.
Yes, that's
kind of
right.
the old school ones, but a bunch of humans. So
I think Lincoln gets, all the credit because he stands up from a sitting position,
in
which
addition,
of course was amazing.
But also because he was a living figure that was so
true.
revered.
Yeah.
And a lot of people had gone to the fair thinking that this was a real human, not knowing. So, yeah. So all of the characters, of course, in Progress Land are fictional, and so, but they were done so well that they actually certainly looked like just kind of mid-Americans.
Yeah.
And actually, you may remember Cousin Orville from the bathtub scene. They actually came up with the gag of him being in the bathtub, and actually Walt, he was so involved in the presentation and the making of this attraction. He kind of got up there and saw it from the guest standpoint and kind of turned the bathtub around. He even hopped in the bathtub himself and kind of positioned himself the way Cousin Orville would be, and he said we should have his toes hanging out of the of the top with him wiggling his toes.
Wow.
So he was so involved with that, and of course we may remember that Mel Blanc came up with, or he was the voice of Cousin Orville, which is really, other than a couple of hiccups that he had done for Gideon in the movie Pinocchio back in 1940, this was the only thing he had ever done for Disney, because he was very involved with
Under
Warner
contract.
Brothers.
Contracts were big back then.
That's right. Actually used him as the no privacy at all around this place.
And I believe he's the only original voice that's still there to this day, because they re-recorded.
They have since changed them all.
But we'll get to that, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm. And of course, Mark Davis. I cannot stress the importance of Mark Davis here. They used him to come up with a lot of the running gags that they had, which he's been tasked with from as far back as the Jungle Cruise, Enchanted Tiki Room, Country Bear Jamboree, of course, Pirates of the Caribbean, Haunted Mansion. So yeah, him coming up with a lot of the gags for these was certainly a critical scene. But anyway, I was going to add one last thing, was that they actually had, in the fourth scene that I had talked about earlier, they actually also included the prediction that there would be computers in the kitchen.
Wow.
Yeah, which I think you see in even today.
Yeah. That's true. That was big back in the 50s, though. Like when you see at Sci-Fi Dine-In Theater over at Disney's Hollywood Studios, they show all of those little newsreels from the home of the future and that sort of thing.
Well, including the home of the future that they installed at Disneyland.
Yeah.
That was kind of a big deal, too. So a lot of these things really do tie into each other. And that's just something I love, that a lot of the Disney attractions throughout the years, a lot of them have the same ideas and things like that. So that's just really cool. But anyway, so they did a mock-up of the entire show, and they assembled it literally on the studio's backlot, each of the 4 different vignettes, and they filmed an entire show, and then they sent that to GE in New York. And they actually used that as a kind of like a work in progress that was later shown on the Disney TV show, Disney Goes to the World's Fair, which was just a spectacular thing. It's on the I can't remember them. The tin sets.
The treasures.
Oh yes, the Walt Disney Treasures. that is of course included on one of those.
That's what I'm here for.
And it's one of my favorites because it actually basically goes through each of the 4 different World's Fair shows and the development of those. And actually a famous scene of Imagineer Wathel Rogers in that contraption. And they actually show this in the pre-show currently at the Carousel of Progress. Anyway, it's got Wathel Rogers in this whole mechanical setup where he's... it was kind of the idea that they would record the audio animatronics movements with this contraption. And then you see him kind of smoking his pipe and kind of moving his arms and all that, and then it shows the father figure behind him doing the exact same movements.
Yeah.
And that was the idea. That contraption actually didn't really work out so well. And so they actually recorded it in hopes that it would eventually work, but they actually never really used that setup as a way to record audio animatronics.
Interesting.
Yeah. They actually had, I think a lot of you have seen the kind of the mechanical board that has the man on it with all these different levers and knobs and things that can be turned, and they record them that way. So, but the one with Wathel Rogers, that one was kind of more showy and so fun. And they actually had Walt up there, with him, kind of demonstrating it as part of that show, the Disney Goes to the World's Fair, which of course was one of the Walt Disney Presents shows.
Yes.
That one aired on TV on, I think, May 17th, 1964, which was probably just a month after the World's Fair opened. Yeah.
We'll have to rewatch that.
Oh, yeah. That's a good one. But anyway, so they showed the whole show to GE, and there was something missing. And Walt said, you know what? Let me work on this, and I'll show it to you in about a week, and we'll see what we can improve upon it. He wanted to add what is called a weenie, something that kind of visually draws the viewer to it. And Walt actually came up with the idea of adding the dog in each of the scenes. So I'm not sure, Rover, Sport, Buster, and Queenie kind of got his start that way. And his name has changed over the years as to which one is which, because I remember the old show actually had where his name changed often throughout the show. Then there was some where his name stayed the same. Rover, leave him alone. So anyway, but the theater itself was kind of a rotating theater. It's basically a giant theater. There are 6 theaters in the shape of a donut that's physically on top of wheels that turn it. So there's that. There's the wall itself that spins from the outside, and then there's the interior that has all the show sets. And then behind that are actually kind of the mechanics of where the behind-the-scenes mechanics of where all that stuff works. But originally, of all of the theater sets, there were 6 with 250 seats each. So there's quite a large capacity there. But when they finally got past the 4th scene and into the 6th scene, guests were invited to walk onto the stage. What? Onto an escalator or a futuristic speed ramp that essentially went into the middle of it, but up a speed ramp, up an escalator up to the 2nd floor.
Yeah. You probably told me that, but I didn't realize it was like on the stage.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
So there was a way where the wall kind of opened up to allow guests to walk onto the stage and
that must have been mind-blowing.
Where essentially the stage was the entrance of an escalator that went up to the second floor.
Wow.
But that was, they actually had a corridor of mirrors as you were going up the speed ramp. And when you got to the top of the speed ramp, you could see the entire top of the dome. And there was a huge dome, so it was kind of like a concave thing where they projected all kinds of images on top of it that were just absolutely impressive, including the sun. And, they had lightning with thunder sounds, and even solar flares and solar fires, as well as spinning atoms, kind of just as a way to illustrate man's quest for new energy sources.
Wow.
Yeah. Which included a demo of nuclear fusion. Yeah. So anyway, that took them up to an exhibit called Galaxy of Science and Engineering, where guests wound their way through the Sky Dome Spectacular, which was that, the whole Sky Dome.
Yeah.
Where they followed man's search for energy, from lightning strikes and caveman's first fire all the way to the discovery of nuclear power. So they had a whole thing where actually right when you got to the top of this escalator, there was an 80-foot spiraling ramp down the middle. Yeah, and it's absolutely mind-blowing.
Wow.
I wish I could have seen this.
Yeah, me too.
Anyway, where they essentially performed what the guide map called the awe-inspiring atomic fusion, a man-made sun. Yeah, it actually create, because you have fission.
Yeah.
That, it's kind of like, I guess, like a nuclear bomb. But fusion is taking atoms and combining them to create like a sun, which is an unlimited source of energy. And they were basically doing this every 6 minutes.
Wow.
And so following a dramatic countdown, there was a percussive blast that echoed throughout the building and a brilliant bright flash. And there was a fusion apparatus at the bottom of all of this. And basically people were on this spiral staircase, not staircase, but like a ramp, looking down upon this every 6 minutes. And it was announced that millions of atoms had been fused to 20 million degrees Fahrenheit.
Jeez.
Yeah. The New York Times actually declared this the most grandiose science exhibit at the fair.
Wow.
Yeah. But it turns out the nuclear fusion was real. Yeah. It's absolutely mind-blowing. But it was a very controlled way. But it was measured by the scientists from GE Labs. But it was such a weird kind of controversial thing to have this there. It was kind of strange. But John Hench, he actually insisted that each of the Big Bangs, essentially that they be measured on the off chance that guests claimed that they were harmed by radiation from this.
Jeez.
And in fact, there actually were some nuisance lawsuits, but they were all proved harmless by the data that was kept there.
Wow.
Yeah. Can you imagine?
Johnny Hench planning ahead.
Yeah, but there actually is a soundtrack for that entire show that's just amazing to listen to. It is kind of dry sounding and very serious, but it's very reminiscent of kind of like the Rite of Spring sequence of Fantasia, as well as, I don't know if you remember the original Universe of Energy, the very first film that you would see before the walls opened up and you would go visit the dinosaurs. It had that vibe to it. Very serious. Like they were doing some serious business here. Which, fusion is serious business.
Yeah.
But essentially that's just an amazing new source of energy that they were looking for. So, anyway, after that, guests could go back up the ramp and go to the Medallion City, which was a glimpse of the electric promise of today. And there were like 20 different vignettes all set up. There was gorgeous music. I think that was the music to buy toasters by.
Yeah.
Which is one of the tracks on this CD set. But anyway, so there are all these vignettes of utopians, like civic, industrial, and residential futures, including live demos from such things as space exploration to an enhanced kitchen. All different kinds of futuristic things, which is kind of a fun new thing. And they also had full-size prototypes of an all-electric city, including model homes, and they were called the Medallion homes from this Medallion city.
Wow.
Yeah. And so, yeah, all of this was on the second floor, which was set up like a main street with many of the faux storefronts, each having its own presentation. And it was just really cool. One of them including a talking toucan. This one was the Toucan and the Parrot Electric Utility Show, which used a toucan and a parrot, of course, and a transformer from a utility pole. A talking transformer from a utility pole,
Early
of course.
stage bird and robot show.
Exactly. From the world of motion. Exactly. One of them was voiced by Paul Frees, of course. And the other one was by Wally Bogue from the original Golden Horseshoe Review. But anyway, his character, the parrot, voiced by Wally Bogue, he was kind of hypnotized into believing that he was actually from the 1939 New York World's Fair.
Weird.
And that he was, so he was confused by all of this progress. And the other bird, the toucan, and the utility pole were trying to explain to him all of the advancements in electricity to show him that, no, this is actually the 1964-65 World's Fair, which is just really cool. And once again, that whole show can be listened to on that CD set, which I'll show you at the end.
You're going to play it for all of us?
Oh, I'd love to. It really is, because it's just so very unique. And all of this stuff was only at the World's Fair. It never moved to Disneyland or anything.
But what did move to Disneyland?
What did?
Yeah, like, are we at that point yet?
Not even quite yet.
Oh, no.
We're almost there.
Okay.
So I will tell you that. But I was just going to say, after guests enjoyed all of that, they exited down an exterior ramp. And what was just really cool about the building, it's such a beautiful building, but they also had the dome of it on the outside was just covered in animated colored lights that kind of gave it the sense of motion, that it was rotating. And so it really drew people to it, especially at night, because it looked like a flying saucer. And there was a fountain of the planets just outside and nightly fireworks. So it just really was just a visually impressive exhibit. And it ended up being the third most attended pavilion at the World's Fair, behind General Motors, which they actually had 2.5 times the capacity. So,
wow, what did General Motors have?
I'm not sure of the name of it. I'd have to look that up.
We never hear about that. We only hear about
Ford.
Ford.
That's interesting. Yeah, because the Ford's Disney's Ford Skyway was the fourth most attended. It was very close to the Carousel of Progress. But that's a whole other story about how Disney went from Ford to having General Motors be their sponsor at Epcot. But that's a whole other thing. But anyway, the thing that was the biggest thing at the fair was the Vatican City one, which actually actually were able to borrow Michelangelo's Pieta, which was a famous statue that had never been moved out of the Vatican City, and I guess it was just very popular. I remember the guy at the fair, the guy who was in charge of the fair, he said his two biggest draws were the fact that he had the Michelangelo and Disney. So
impressive.
Yes. But anyway, so a total of 3,600 guests were able to visit this pavilion at the fair, and a total of 16 million folks did throughout its 2-year thing. I guess I never really said what the dates were. The fair was a 6-month thing from April through October in both the years 1964 and 65. So they took a kind of 6-month break in between the two. And just kind of a big deal. Oh, there was one other thing I wanted to say. Actually, on opening day of this pavilion, Walt Disney actually cut the ribbon, and his guest there was G.E. Fair, which was the grandmother audio animatronic from the show, and actually flew her first class.
Yeah.
And it was kind of a strange looking thing. They actually flew an audio animatronic where she had her own seat.
I love the footage of that with Walt sitting next to her. Pretty funny.
But her name was G.E. Fair. Get it?
I do.
Anyway, so Dick Irvine, he was later the head of Imagineering. He actually called this whole thing a refrigerator show, just a way to sell GE products. But it was really kind of the first really big example of a company sponsoring a Disney exhibit or a whole Disney show, and was just a way of benefiting both parties. Disney got the money from GE to create all of this technology and to create this exhibit, which of course did exhibit General Electric products. So they got the benefit of being, I had mentioned that before, of just being, tied to Disney's name.
Yeah.
And the public, of course, won because it was a fun exhibit that later did move to Disneyland. And so they moved the show itself to Disneyland, and the first 3 scenes, really, there were no changes made. The 4th scene they did update before it went to Disneyland, and they still had the ramp that went up to the 2nd floor, but all of the stuff with the nuclear fusion, that all went away. Even the parrot and the talking transformer show, that all went away. And the Medallion City, that all went away too. But they did have the model that a lot of people can see today when they ride Walt Disney World's People Mover.
A very small portion.
A very small portion, because actually the full portion of that is, I think I have that. It was first off, it was called Progress City USA, as you all know. It was 115 feet by 60 feet. I don't even know how much the one is there, but it's
not that big.
But anyway, it had 1,400 working streetlights.
Wow.
It had 2,500 moving vehicles along the little streets, and not just cars, but they even had like little people movers and monorails and things.
Wow.
And they had a total of 4,500 structures and 20,000 little trees. It was such an elaborate model.
I can't imagine something that big.
Yeah, the whole thing was done 1/8 scale. Walt actually insisted that the interiors of these structures be furnished and finished and individually lit.
Wow.
And we were thinking about that. A buddy of mine who actually he's an Imagineer who actually got to kind of clean up that model. So he actually, the one here on the People Mover, he actually was tasked with kind of going into the model and kind of cleaning it up a bit. So he's actually physically been there. And we were thinking about it like, they didn't individually light 4,500 structures. I think it was just the ones that were probably up front.
Makes sense.
Yeah, the ones that people would be more likely to see.
Yeah.
But anyway, so that was essentially what was up there. But so there was a whole 4th show where the family talked about the city that they were living in, and they did include the idea of the medallion homes, and they talked about it a little bit. But the model itself, it had its own airport, its own amusement park, its own nuclear power plant.
Yeah, because the part that we see from the People Mover seems to be like the center of it. So it must have just gone out so far with so many little substructures and, smaller
and it's
details.
very reminiscent, of course, of the thing that later became known as Epcot. And essentially it was. This was Walt's. The whole idea of Progress Land was Walt's idea to try to get to Epcot, his grand idea. The whole idea of the fair was not only to develop all of these new technologies, these new ride systems, but also to expand because Disneyland being so far out west, he lacked not only a lot of the audience, but what he called the sophisticates. Because, and I don't mean that in a way that people from the East are better,
Right.
but it is where a lot of the government was.
Yeah.
A lot of the corporate headquarters were all from there. So a lot of the kind of the business elites were from places like New York, Philadelphia, and that kind of place, Washington. So, but Disneyland didn't really draw from the East too much. So his idea was to come up with an East Coast place, which was Walt Disney World, of course. And of course, having the Magic Kingdom there was just the initial plan, but the ultimate goal was his Epcot, the experimental prototype community of tomorrow.
Oh, yes.
And the model of Progress City, USA was kind of like the visual encapsulation of what Epcot was. So, kind of a big thing. But anyway, so all of that went to Disneyland. Actually, all of the 4 shows at the World's Fair went to Disneyland, including It's a Small World, the Lincoln show. And the Skyway moved in a way that they didn't move the whole show, but a lot of the prehistoric dinosaurs are in the Primeval World section of the railroad there. But anyway, they didn't really have a place in Tomorrowland for that whole theater. That place where it sits now actually used to be the Space Bar, which was a restaurant, a quick service restaurant.
That's funny.
Serving space burgers, and they had these newfangled things called vending machines.
Christian and I were both thinking like space bar, like on your laptop. A different interpretation.
That's right. I don't know if that was called the Space Bar then, but it was the Space Bar.
Yeah, no, I get what it was. We were just saying it.
Anyway, they had these new things called vending machines.
Ah, yes.
That dispense not only things like fresh coffee, but ice cream.
Yeah, like the automats from New York. My mom would visit those very often.
Yeah, so
in New York
this
City.
was where the theater is now. It was the Space Bar, which they had seating that overlooked the Tomorrowland Autopia. Because back at that time, what is now the Autopia, there were 2 different ones. There was the Fantasyland Autopia and the Tomorrowland Autopia. And where the loading was quite right there. And they had the Space Bar.
Do you have photos of the Space Bar?
I do.
Okay, we'll have to.
We'll have to include those. And that's right where the Skyway started. The Skyway from Tomorrowland was right there as well. So so this kind of gave Walt the idea to have a brand new Tomorrowland, because by this time, with all of the advancements that were happening in the world, including space travel, going to the moon was a thing that would happen very soon. But they had, astronauts going into space and all these advancements in technology that everything that was in Tomorrowland at that point was outdated.
Yeah.
So he thought, okay, let's do a whole new Tomorrowland. And this was the 1967 remake of Tomorrowland, the new Tomorrowland, if you will, which consisted of a new location for the rocket jets, the People Mover, my favorite.
Yes.
The People Mover. I loved the People Mover. It also included the new 360-degree show, America the Beautiful, the Flight to the Moon, which was a redesign, and, of course, my other true favorite, Adventure Through Inner Space. I have many, many memories of seeing that show. The Adventure Through Inner Space was my favorite. I had said previously the People Mover I'm wrong. Adventure Through Inner Space was my all-time favorite. But anyway, so they included that, as well as they brought the Carousel of Progress. And so they made a new theater for it, kind of way in the back of Tomorrowland. And they put that there.
Was it just the one from the World's Fair, like taken apart and put back together? It wasn't but then they just had to change the interior stuff upstairs.
Initially built it on the studio lot in Burbank and then shipped it out to New York.
That's so crazy to
then
think about.
Took it apart and shipped it back to Disneyland.
I can't imagine. And that and like It's a Small World.
Yeah.
It's just mind-boggling to me to think
those two
of
shows were
them.
intact. The Lincoln show at one point, they actually, because the Lincoln show actually didn't premiere until I think the second season of the fair, but it was so popular they actually had it running in Disneyland at the same time as the World's Fair.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
But the Carousel of Progress of the 4 attractions from the fair was the last one to open in Disneyland in 1965. That opened on July 2nd, 1967. Yeah. So, yeah. Boop, boop. Just checking to make sure I got everything.
And then GE was like, hey, everyone's seen this. We want it to go to your new park.
Oh, that's right.
Right?
Pretty much. Yeah, well, it was a combination of that, plus they had an idea for a new show with the upcoming bicentennial. They had an idea for America Sings, which would eventually replace Carousel of Progress there. And that opened in 1975, just right before the bicentennial. It was a very patriotic show that kind of showcasing all of the music in America's history. I personally have seen it many, many times, and I absolutely have fond memories of it.
I do remember the bicentennial.
Oh, yeah.
But I don't remember
at Disney World,
it at Disneyland.
Sure.
No.
So anyway, they brought Carousel of Progress. They moved it. They packed it up and shipped it east to Disney World. It wasn't an opening day attraction, but it was kind of the second stage of their Tomorrowland that opened kind of the same idea, it's the same time period as the Space Mountain and People Mover there.
Tomorrowland, 75.
That's right.
And it's really just celebrated its 45th birthday here at Magic Kingdom.
I'm wearing the 40th anniversary shirt right now.
Yeah,
so I guess
because it was January 15th, 75, so
that's right.
We just passed January 15th, so 45 years.
Yeah.
A year younger than myself. But I think I look a little better than some of those figures.
I would agree with this.
Hopefully I'm in better condition. Who knows? Anyway. Magic Kingdom.
Ah, yes, the Magic Kingdom. I actually really don't have a lot of this.
All right. Well, I can talk then because I really experienced it.
I was just going to say one other thing. They actually did change the song.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Okay.
So GE was like, we don't want people to think about the future. We want people to think about now.
Because they actually got a new CEO at this point, Jack Welch, who was kind of like a real stickler for things, and he wanted it changed. So you go ahead with that.
Well, they wanted people to buy new things now. Now is the time to buy new appliances at GE.
So what did they call this new song?
Now is the time. Parentheses, the best time of your life.
Now is the best time.
Or whatever. The best time of your life. So yeah, the Sherman Brothers came up with that again. And the amazing thing about the Sherman Brothers is, boy, they sure are good with an assignment. And I grew up hearing that song, and it got stuck in my head just as much as It's a Great Big Beautiful. I'm not going to sing the whole thing. And It's a Small World. Like, all of these songs were just like the perfect jingle that stuck into your mind.
Yeah, I did see the original Carousel of Progress personally at Disneyland, like in '74, but I was too young to remember it. But then I didn't see it again until my first visit to Disney World in '84.
And you heard that song.
And I heard the new song. Yeah. And so, that's kind of the one that I grew up with.
Yeah, which is funny because most purists, only like the Great Big Beautiful Tomorrow. But I think it's a good song on its own.
They're both
the lyrics
fantastic,
are very also inspiring and, motivating. So I think it's good. But I do I like them both. So
yeah, I like them both equally. I'm not partial to one or the other.
But it's good to think about, a Great Big Beautiful Tomorrow shining at the end of every day. And
what's amazing is they still actually use kind of versions of both of those songs in various locations, including the Interventions area at Disneyland, as well as just various kind of like background music in Tomorrowland, as well as Epcot even.
Yeah.
So.
And that, is what I grew up remembering. And the theater in Magic Kingdom, I don't know what it was like in Disneyland because I never experienced it there, but it was like the blue and white stripes.
Oh, yeah.
And then they would get thinner. So as the whole theater moved, it would look like, there was moving
I
stripes.
remembered it as a red and white striped building, but I think that was my memories of America Sings. I think that's how it was for America Sings.
Yeah, because like all of Tomorrowland was pretty much blue and white back then. So
yeah,
I think it was blue, but if I'm wrong, let me know.
I'm not sure. Because to me, Tomorrowland was the kind of the late 70s, early 80s version of the one at Disneyland. That's the one I grew up with. And that was, they had America Sings there. So.
Well, then in 1985, GE's contract was up. They had a 10-year contract. And they're like, no, we're good. We're not going to renew.
Even though they did sponsor Horizons at the time.
Yeah.
At Epcot.
Which many say is the continuation of the family from Carousel of Progress.
That's right. It's kind of a way. It's essentially, it's a continuation. Basically, it's showcasing the family in a whole different time period, and this is kind of now the actual
different
future.
Types of future that exist.
So it's not necessarily the exact same father,
right?
But it's just another family. But the whole idea is a continuation of this. Yeah.
So then it just kind of sat there for a while, and not until 1993 when Tomorrowland was undergoing its terrible, terrible changes.
Which included the alien encounter.
Yeah, alien encounter I'm okay with, but
the whole thing.
The architecture, the design, they're just now getting rid of.
Yeah, I don't know why they thought rockwork would be kind of the new thing.
I get them thinking that the Tomorrowland from even the 70s, but also the 50s, is not very futuristic anymore. Yeah. However, I think there's been sort of like a cyclical, now the retro futurist kind of like mid-century modern future looking stuff is futuristic again.
Yeah. They've always had problems keeping Tomorrowland futuristic.
Yeah, but I think
it's always caught up with itself.
Also, I think they're realizing, I don't know, I'm not an Imagineer, but I think they're realizing that like clean lines and not these like very specific design architecture looks of like all those weird gears and things like that are the way to go. And it's slowly changing. I'm excited to see where it goes.
I'm excited to see, but it'll be interesting when they include the Neutron coaster.
Yeah.
How if that'll even mesh with the whole land at all, or will be a complete mess, or a contrast with how everything should be. I'm sure they can find a way to make it all look nice together.
Eventually,
hopefully, they can do this.
Yeah, because even the Grand Prix Raceway is not futuristic in any way. No. So.
And there are ways that they can make it that way.
Yeah, for sure.
They could make it a moonscape, for example, and it could have the cars kind of go over a full planet.
It could be sponsored by Tesla.
Like oh, yeah.
And they could be all electric vehicles. Yeah. That would be fun.
If you think about, all of the noise pollution, to me, it is an iconic sound.
It is, and
Disney
smell,
World.
the smell of the little engines. But anyway, back to 1993. That's when they did a total revamp, sort of. Yep. They redid all of the narration, all the voice acting, except for Uncle Orville or Cousin Orville.
Yeah, that's right.
And it was now Gene Shepherd, which everyone knows and loves from A Christmas Story.
That's right.
And many other tales.
Yeah, and he's got once again, just a very classic down-home voice as well.
Iconic
very
voice.
Comfortable. So I didn't hate that change.
No, I liked it. And I guess at that point they kind of changed the fourth scene to be their idea of what the year 2000 would look like, but the 1994 version of that.
With laser discs.
And virtual reality with grandma and stuff like that.
She was very good at that game.
Yeah. And because of all the weird things that they did to Tomorrowland, that was when they changed the People Mover to the Tomorrowland Transit Authority.
Yeah.
And they just had all those weird backstories.
Yeah,
So
including they even had that the new Carousel of Progress was quote unquote sponsored by the Tomorrowland Metro Retro Society.
Metro Retro Historical Society.
Okay, very good.
That's what I was about to say. Yes. Yeah, so all that weird stuff, like I really, when they made those changes and like the People Mover, especially when they changed that, I was very not happy. And the narration changes and like the little thing with the lady with her getting her hair done, which is still there and all that stuff. Like I was not a fan.
Yeah.
But after that, nothing really happened until 2016 when they changed the paint on the outside. That was a good change because they're going with a lot of like color blocking sort of things. They changed the paint going up to the People Mover. They changed the name back to it was like the TTA People Mover now.
Yeah.
Like they did a compromise kind of thing.
Yeah.
But yeah,
a lot of weird little things like that. But.
And it's gone through, being a seasonal attraction. Now I think it's back to full time.
Because there was a time when they were running it seasonally, and everyone knew at the time if they run something seasonally based on the path, that just means that this is kind of the death knell for this attraction. Surely it's on its way out. And that has happened for a lot of attractions. Mm-hmm. But it did not happen for this one.
Yeah.
So it's kind of experienced like a little resurgence, I would say.
There definitely are, many, many fans of the Carousel of Progress and keeping it in its...
Including just the fact that it has Walt Disney's name right on it.
Right, exactly. And it has his, imprint all over it as well. So there was apparently a tweet in 2017, supposedly from a Tomorrowland cast member, saying that an all-new cast and an all-new script was going to be coming soon, and then that tweet was deleted. So I don't know. You'll have to...
Are you sure maybe he wasn't a bus driver or a security guard or something?
Maybe. I don't say that to make it factual in any way, but I don't know. Just to say, what do you think if they were to redo it? Would you want a whole new script?
I wouldn't mind a whole new script. I do kind of like it the way it is. I liked the old version. I like the old version even better than the current version for the the first three scenes. The initial idea, of course, for the fourth scene was to keep it modern and futuristic.
Yeah, constantly changing.
But
it's hard to do that with
very hard.
The previous scene before that being the 1940s. Like so much has happened in then. But do you really want to go through the 70s with avocado green dishwashers and refrigerators?
I would say no.
And really,
so who knows?
The original intent was to showcase appliances.
Yeah,
so
for GE.
If you were to do it now and go back and change the whole thing, would you just take out the appliance component? Like that's not the focus anymore?
Appliances are kind of a big thing in people's homes, but I'd say they're more towards entertainment.
It would be a very big challenge, I think, to try to
so who knows?
Redo it. Yeah. I don't envy those Imagineers if they are indeed working on it.
But if anyone can do it,
this is true.
Imagineers, they have the ability to tell stories through 3D things.
I think maybe if they were to redo the last scene and the way that I forget her name, but the girl is like, oh, you're not going to tell us about the time before you had a car phone. Patricia. I think they could do that with like other family members, and each of them are reminiscing like the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, maybe. That's really the only way they could do, like fit it all in the last scene and then have like a 10-year-old who's, on Snapchat and...
Or they could even take what became of Horizons and maybe bring that there. Right?
Interesting.
As a way, I don't know.
Let's just expand the theater so it's now 16 different rotating scenes.
Yeah, I guess I failed to say that when it came to Florida, of course, everything on the second floor was completely gone by that point.
Yeah.
So there were no speed ramps that went into the stage or anything like that. That's all gone.
Yeah.
I forgot to mention that. So
I do wish I had seen it when it came to Disneyland.
Yeah.
But I guess I probably wouldn't have had any memory of it, even if I had.
I've been there, and I have no memory of it.
Yeah. but being able to go up to a second story
that's just
would have been
nice.
very cool.
And so that explains why even there at Disneyland they do have the 2-story Innoventions area with that ramp that goes down the exterior.
Yeah.
That was the exit of all of that. So.
Well, I think we've pretty much covered it.
Yeah.
From its humble beginnings, which really weren't so humble.
Not at all. Yeah, I mean, they had just some really bold plans initially for Disneyland, and then all the World's Fair stuff to me is just amazing.
Yeah.
I really, really wish I could have seen that whole World's Fair.
Me too. Someone needs to come out with like a documentary.
Oh yeah.
I mean, I'm sure something exists, but I haven't found it yet.
Yeah. Well, I should mention a lot of the info that I got was from this 5 CD set that was released maybe 10 years ago. But there's a full disc on each of the 4 shows, including a second bonus disc on Progress Land that includes not only the full shows, but just a whole bunch of the backup stuff and all the supplemental stuff for each of those shows. And this is an absolute treasure. I would highly, highly recommend this set. And I have no idea if it's on iTunes or Apple Music or whatever.
I'm looking right now. It does appear to be on Amazon, so I will put a link to that in the blog post.
Because
accompanying.
All of the tracks on there are just pure gold. A lot of really great stuff on there.
Yeah. It's funny to hear the original narration, which was slightly different from what went to.
But not only the original
Magic
narration,
Kingdom.
they had the whole test version with the Peabody's from Middlburg,
even listened to all
USA.
this, so I will have to.
Yeah.
I don't think I have a CD player in my
highly
car,
recommend it. And they even include There's a Great Big Beautiful Tomorrow, the version that was in Horizons, in that one scene.
Yes.
Where that lady was soaking in a bathtub up on the second floor.
And the guy was singing it on TV.
Yeah.
Or the radio, I forget.
That song is even on there too.
Wow. Yeah, so I mean, part of why I opened the show with the original narration from the fair is the words in there, and it changed slightly when it came to Disneyland and then Magic Kingdom. They're really important, and they're very inspiring, and progress isn't just moving forward, it's a whole bunch of other stuff. Yeah. And I had to say turban the way that he said it, even though I would not pronounce it that way. I would say turbine, but you know. Yeah. But yeah, it was just really like, getting release from drudgery.
Yeah, as a way to entertain ourselves.
Yeah.
To have relaxing, comfortable lives through work.
And I think when I visited Magic Kingdom back in the 80s, this was one of my favorite attractions, always. It was the People Mover and the Carousel of Progress. And yeah, I hope it comes back better than ever at some point in the future, but don't change it too much. But let us know in the comments on YouTube, or you can comment on Facebook. We can start a discussion there. What you think of past versions of the Carousel of Progress, the current version, what you think could or should be changed, if anything. Yeah,
and since this is the it's the more people have seen this stage show than any other in running American history, American theater. So I'm sure probably everyone listening to this has seen it in one form or another.
I'm sure people in actual theater love that statistic because they're like, hey,
but it's true.
We're live people. But it is true. Yes. Stage show. So
since that is a fun fact, I'm sure everyone listening to this has probably seen it.
I'm sure.
And has memories of it. Yeah. And so we'd love to hear what you think. What should be done to it? Yeah. Should it be kept just as is? Should they update?
Should the last scene be updated, or the whole attraction?
Or should it be expanded to include 16 different?
Yes, that's what I'm going with. That's my vote. All
That'd
right.
be fun.
Well, I think we've reached the top of the waterfall, as it were, and covered this entire topic. So we thank you, of course, for listening. Make sure you like and subscribe wherever you're listening or watching, and tell a friend that you heard what hopefully you enjoyed this podcast.
I hope so.
We'd love to hear from you. So thanks for joining us up the waterfall.
Bye now.